The glass in my hand cracked before I even saw the needle coming. I was 3 seconds from finishing my drink at a rusted bar on Kesh Station when a shimmer passed through the air near the woman across the room. My body moved before my mind caught up. I grabbed her wrist, twisted her away from the table, and the dart that was meant for her throat buried itself in the wooden counter instead. The whole bar went silent. She stared at me, gold eyes wide, breath caught somewhere between shock and disbelief. Her name was Vaithril Solanis Carr, heir to the Solanis Dominion, and she had just watched a stranger save her life without asking a single question first. "You," she said, voice trembling but controlled. "You are human." "Last I checked," I said, letting go of her wrist and turning to scan the room for whoever had fired that dart. Nobody moved. Whoever it was had already melted into the crowd, professional enough to vanish the moment their shot failed. I picked up the dart with 2 fingers, careful not to touch the tip, and studied the faint blue residue coating the needle. "Neurotoxin," I said. "Fast-acting. Whoever sent this wanted it to look like a heart failure, not an assassination." Vaithril's 2 bodyguards, a pair of tall Threlian warriors with plated skin and short swords strapped to their backs, finally reacted. They surrounded her, weapons half drawn, eyes darting through the crowd with the kind of tension that comes from people who know they failed and are trying to hide it. "We should leave," one of them said. "You should have left 10 minutes ago," I muttered, tossing the dart onto the counter. Vaithril studied me for a long moment. I was nothing special to look at. A worn jacket, boots that had seen too many stations, and a face that had stopped smiling a long time ago. I was the kind of man nobody in this part of the galaxy trusted, because I was human, and humans had a reputation. "What is your name?" she asked. "Ryan Cole." "Mr. Cole," she said, straightening her posture, despite the fear still clinging to her voice. "I am looking for someone to protect me. My last 2 guards were murdered 2 days ago. My court believes it was an accident." "I do not." I almost laughed. "You want to hire the guy who just embarrassed your bodyguards in front of a room full of strangers." "I want to hire someone who saw the attack before it happened," she said. "Everyone else in this room saw nothing until the dart hit the counter. You moved before it left the shooter's hand." That part was true, though I didn't know how to explain it to her. Humans had a different kind of nervous system, tuned by centuries of danger that most species in this part of space had never experienced. We noticed things. We reacted instead of thinking first. It made us fast in the wrong ways and slow in the right ones, socially speaking, but it kept us alive. "You don't want a human bodyguard," I said. "Ask anyone in this station. We're unstable, unpredictable, not registered with your Concord peacekeeping systems. I don't follow your treaties." "That is exactly why I want you," she said. "Everyone who follows the treaties already knows how to get around them." I studied her face. There was something steady underneath the fear, a kind of intelligence that refused to panic even after watching her own guards nearly get her killed twice in 2 days. I respected that, even if I didn't yet understand why she was so desperate to trust a stranger. "I don't come cheap," I said. "I did not expect you to." Her guards exchanged a look that told me exactly what they thought of this decision. I didn't blame them. In their eyes, hiring a human to protect a member of Dominion royalty was like hiring a wild predator to guard a nursery. But Vaithril had already made up her mind, and something in the way she held herself told me she was used to making decisions nobody else agreed with. We left the bar together, her guards trailing behind with visible discomfort, and stepped into the busy corridor of Kesh Station. The lights above us flickered between soft white and pale blue, the artificial sky doing its best impression of daylight. Merchants called out from stalls, selling foreign spices and glowing trinkets, and travelers from a dozen different worlds moved past us without a second glance. Except for the ones watching us. I caught at least 3 sets of eyes tracking Vaithril as we walked, none of them bothering to hide their interest well enough. "You're being followed," I said quietly. I know, she replied. I have been followed since I left my homeworld 3 weeks ago. Then you already knew someone wanted you dead before that dart flew. She hesitated before answering. My family's political rivals hired the Valkyrie Guild. They are the most feared group of assassins in this sector. Efficient, silent, and until tonight, undefeated. The name meant nothing to me, but the tone in her voice told me it should. I filed it away and kept walking, eyes constantly moving across the crowd, checking exits, checking hands, checking the little details that most people never noticed until it was too late. We reached a private transport dock reserved for diplomatic use. Her guards moved ahead to check the vehicle, running scanners over the hull and doors with a level of caution that told me they had learned at least one lesson from their failure earlier. I stayed close to Vathril, watching the surrounding walkways rather than the transport itself. Why did you agree to protect me? She asked while we waited. You do not know me. You have no reason to risk your life for a stranger. I thought about lying, giving her some noble answer about protecting the innocent, but she deserved honesty if she was about to put her life in my hands. I need the credits, I said. And I'm tired of doing nothing that matters. She studied me again, longer this time, like she was trying to decide if that answer satisfied her. That is an honest reason, she finally said. I respect that more than empty promises of loyalty. The guards signaled that the transport was clear. We climbed inside, the doors sealing shut with a soft hiss, and the vehicle lifted off the platform, gliding smoothly into the traffic lanes above the station's lower levels. Through the window, I watched Kesh Station shrink beneath us, its lights blinking like a field of dying stars. Tell me about the Valkyrie Guild, I said. They are not like common criminals, Vathril explained. They train from childhood. Every member has killed dozens of targets, some of them protected by the finest guards in the Concord. They do not fail. They failed tonight. Because of you, she said, which is precisely why I believe they will not stop until either you or I am gone. I leaned back in my seat, processing the weight of what she was telling me. This wasn't a simple bodyguard job. This was a war that had already started before I agreed to take the contract, a war against people who had never lost, against a princess who refused to bow to threats, and against whatever expectations the galaxy held about what a human being was capable of. They're going to underestimate me, I said quietly. Everyone always does. Is that a mistake on their part? I looked at her, the first hint of a smile crossing my face. You have no idea. The transport soared higher, leaving the station behind, carrying us toward a future neither of us could fully predict. But one thing was already becoming clear. Whatever the Valkyrie Guild thought they knew about hunting royalty, they had never hunted anyone with a human standing between them and their target. That mistake was about to cost them everything. Vathril watched the stars pass outside the window, her reflection ghostly against the glass. My court will not approve of this, she said. They believe humans are too dangerous to trust, too unpredictable to control. They're right about the unpredictable part, I said. But you didn't hire me to be controlled. You hired me to keep you alive. She turned to face me fully, something shifting in her expression, a mixture of fear and quiet hope. Then keep me alive, Mr. Cole. That's the plan, I said, and meant it more than she could possibly know. Outside, the darkness of open space stretched endlessly around us, hiding threats we couldn't yet see. Somewhere out there, the Valkyrie Guild was already planning their next attempt, confident that their failure tonight was simply bad luck, rather than the beginning of something they had never faced before. They didn't know yet what it meant to hunt someone protected by a human who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. They would learn soon enough, and when they did, the lesson would not be gentle. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the transport settle my nerves, but my senses stayed alert, listening for anything out of place. Vathril sat quietly beside me, trusting a stranger with her life because every other option had already failed her. I intended to make sure that trust was not misplaced. The transport carried us toward the Dominion's outer embassy, a fortress of glass and steel orbiting a quiet moon, far from the chaos of Kesh Station, but not nearly far enough from the danger that had already found us. As the embassy came into view, gleaming under distant starlight, I felt the first true sense of what I had signed up for. This was no longer just a contract. This was a war I intended to win. The embassy's landing platform was quiet when we arrived, too quiet for a place meant to house one of the most protected members of the Solani's Dominion. I noticed it the moment the transport doors opened. No greeting party, no scheduled security sweep, just 3 guards standing near the entrance, shifting on their feet like men trying not to look nervous. "This isn't normal," I said under my breath. Vaithral's eyes narrowed as she studied the platform. "No, it is not." Her 2 Threlian guards moved ahead first, weapons drawn but lowered, scanning the open space with practiced caution. I kept close to Vaithral, my attention split between the embassy doors and the shadows along the platform's edge, where anyone with patience could hide and wait. "Ambassador Korik was supposed to meet us here," Vaithral said quietly. "He never misses an arrival." "Then either he's late," I said, "or he's already dead." She didn't argue with me. We crossed the platform together, moving quickly but carefully, until one of her guards suddenly stopped and raised a fist, signaling for silence. I followed his gaze toward a maintenance corridor branching off from the main entrance, where a faint smear of dark liquid trailed across the floor. "Stay behind me," I told Vaithral. For once, she didn't argue either. I moved forward, senses sharpening the way they always did when danger was close enough to smell. The corridor smelled of ozone and something metallic, the unmistakable scent of a struggle that had ended badly. A few meters in, we found Ambassador Korik slumped against the wall, unconscious but breathing, a thin line of blood trailing from a wound along his temple. "He's alive," I said, checking his pulse. "Barely." Vaithral knelt beside him, worry breaking through her composed expression. "Who did this?" Before anyone could answer, the lights along the corridor flickered and died. I grabbed Vaithral and pulled her against the wall just as the first shot cracked through the darkness, a silent pulse of energy that scorched the spot where she had been standing seconds earlier. Her guards reacted instantly, taking defensive positions and returning suppressive fire toward the direction of the shot, but I already knew this wasn't a simple ambush. This was the Valkyrie Guild, and they had learned from their failure at the bar. "How many?" Vaithral whispered. "Enough to matter," I said, scanning the darkness for movement. "Stay low. Stay behind me, no matter what happens." The emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, casting the corridor in dim red, just enough to reveal 3 figures moving with terrifying precision along the upper walkways above us. They wore dark armor that absorbed most of the light, faces hidden behind smooth, featureless masks, each movement calculated and silent. Her guards fired again, forcing one of the attackers to retreat behind cover, but the other 2 split apart, flanking us from both sides with practiced coordination. This was exactly the kind of fight they had trained their entire lives for: precise, clean, and merciless. It just wasn't the kind of fight I was used to losing. I grabbed a fire suppression canister from the wall beside me and hurled it toward the nearest attacker, following it with a burst of gunfire that forced him to dodge instead of aim. The moment he broke position, I closed the distance, using the tight corridor to my advantage, where his long-range training meant nothing against someone willing to fight close and fast. He raised his weapon just as I reached him, but I was already inside his guard, disarming him with a sharp twist that sent his weapon clattering to the floor. He reacted with surprising speed, throwing a strike toward my ribs, but years of hard experience told me exactly how to redirect the force instead of absorbing it. I countered, driving him back against the wall hard enough to end the fight before it truly began. He slumped to the floor, unconscious, and I turned just in time to see the second attacker retreating toward the shadows, clearly unwilling to continue after watching his partner fall so quickly. "Cole," Vathril shouted. I spun around to see the third assassin emerging from cover behind her guards, weapon aimed directly at her chest. There wasn't enough time to reach her. There wasn't enough time to shout a warning that would matter. So instead, I did the only thing that made sense in that half-second of pure instinct. I threw myself between them. The shot struck my shoulder instead of her heart, a burning line of pain that spread through my entire arm, but I didn't fall. I grabbed the assassin's weapon before he could fire again, forcing the barrel upward as the second shot scorched the ceiling instead of finding its target. He was strong, trained to fight through pain and pressure, but he had never faced someone who simply refused to let go. I drove my elbow into his mask hard enough to crack the material, following through with enough force to send him staggering backward into the wall. He recovered quickly, reaching for a blade hidden along his forearm, but Vathril's guards finally closed the distance, overwhelming him before he could use it. The fight ended almost as quickly as it began, the corridor falling silent except for my own ragged breathing and the quiet groans of the defeated assassin. Vathril rushed to my side, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "You are hurt." "I've had worse," I said, though the pain in my shoulder disagreed loudly. "You took that shot for me," she said, voice trembling. "You could have simply warned me. You did not have to place yourself in front of it." I met her gaze, steady despite the pain. A warning wouldn't have been fast enough. This was... She stared at me, like she was seeing something she hadn't expected. Not just the willingness to fight, but the willingness to sacrifice without hesitation. Her guards exchanged uncertain glances, clearly unsettled by what they had just witnessed. In their culture, protection meant strategy, distance, calculated risk. What I had done went against every instinct they had been trained to follow. "You people truly do not fear death," Vathril said quietly. "We fear it plenty," I said, pressing a hand against my wound. "We just decided a long time ago that some things matter more." The unconscious assassin at my feet stirred slightly, and I crouched beside him, pulling off his mask to reveal a face marked with cold, professional calm, even in defeat. His eyes opened slowly, meeting mine with something between confusion and quiet respect. "You should not have survived that," he said, voice hoarse. "Tell your guild that humans don't play by your rules," I said. "Tell them exactly what happened here tonight." He studied me for a long moment before nodding once, understanding the message clearly. Vathril's guards restrained him, preparing to hand him over to embassy security along with the others, while medical staff finally arrived to help the ambassador and treat my wound. As they worked, Vathril remained close, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite name. "They will not stop after this," she said. "You embarrassed them twice in one night. Their pride will demand a response." "Then let them come," I said. "I'd rather face them here, on my terms, than wait for them to find another blind spot." She studied me for a long moment, something resolute settling into her expression. "You are not what I expected when I decided to hire a human guard." "What did you expect?" "Recklessness," she admitted. "Anger without control. Instead, I see someone who fights with purpose, even when the cost is high." I allowed myself a small, tired smile, despite the pain radiating through my shoulder. That's the difference between fighting to survive and fighting to make sure the threat never comes back. Her eyes lingered on me, processing that distinction carefully, the kind of understanding that would only grow stronger as the days ahead tested both of us further. The medical team finished stabilizing my wound, wrapping the injury tightly enough to allow movement without further damage, and Vathril helped me to my feet despite my protests that I could manage on my own. "You saved my life twice tonight," she said, as we walked toward the embassy's inner chambers, leaving the fallen assassins behind for security to handle. "I intend to remember that." "Just doing the job," I said. "No," she replied firmly. "This was more than a job. I saw it in the way you moved, the way you placed yourself between danger and me without a single moment of hesitation. That is not something a person does simply for payment. I didn't have an answer for that, not one I was ready to give her yet, so I let the silence speak instead. As we reached the embassy's inner doors, the weight of what had just happened settled fully across my shoulders, heavier than the wound itself. The Valkyrie Guild had underestimated me once at the bar, dismissing the encounter as an unfortunate accident rather than a warning. Tonight, they had sent a team prepared for a fight and lost anyway, leaving 3 of their own defeated, and one message delivered clearly enough that even their pride couldn't ignore it. They would not make the same mistake a third time without escalating everything. And somewhere far beyond the embassy's walls, in a place hidden from prying eyes, the leader of the Valkyrie Guild was about to receive news that would change the way they viewed their next target entirely. A human bodyguard standing between them and their contract was no longer an inconvenience. He was a problem they intended to remove permanently, whatever the cost. I intended to make sure that cost was far higher than they were prepared to pay. The Guild's response came not as an attack, but as silence. 3 days passed without a single sign of movement, no distant shadows, no failed attempts, no whispers among the embassy staff about strangers asking questions. For most people, that silence would have felt like relief. For me, it felt like a held breath before something far worse. "They're planning," I told Vaithril during one of our morning walks along the embassy's private garden, a quiet space of alien flora glowing faintly under artificial sunlight. "Professional killers don't just give up after losing twice." "Perhaps they are reconsidering the contract," she offered, though her voice lacked conviction. "Or reconsidering their strategy," I said. "Either way, we shouldn't relax." She nodded slowly, trusting my judgment, even when it meant living under constant tension. In the days since the ambush, something had shifted between us. Not friendship exactly, but a deep, quiet respect built from shared danger. Her guards, once openly skeptical of my presence, had grown more accepting, watching how I approached security not as rigid procedure, but as constant adaptation. That morning, I used the quiet to study the embassy itself, walking every corridor, memorizing every entrance, exit, ventilation shaft, and blind spot. If the Guild intended to strike again, I wanted to know this building better than they did. "You are being thorough," Vaithril observed, watching me trace a path along the eastern wing. "Thorough keeps people alive," I said. "Your last guards weren't thorough. They followed procedure. Procedure gets predictable, and predictable gets you killed. And what do you follow?" I paused, considering the question honestly. Instinct, mostly, and the assumption that whoever's hunting you is smarter than they look. She studied me for a long moment, her golden eyes thoughtful. "That is a heavy way to live. It's the only way I know how." Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Ambassador Korik, fully recovered from his injuries, though the memory of that night still lingered behind his eyes. He approached with a tablet in hand, his expression tense. "Your Highness," he said, "the Dominion Council has requested a formal review of your security arrangement." Vaithril's posture stiffened. "They wish to remove Mr. Cole. They believe hiring an unregistered human mercenary reflects poorly on the Dominion's image," Korik admitted. "Several council members have expressed concern about, and I quote, uncontrolled variables." I almost laughed at the phrase. Uncontrolled variable. That was exactly what had kept her alive twice already. "They weren't concerned when their approved guards failed to stop an assassination attempt," I said. "No," Korik agreed, "but politics rarely follows logic." Vaithril's jaw tightened, a flash of quiet anger crossing her expression. "Tell the council that Mr. Cole remains under my personal authority. I will not risk my life to satisfy their comfort." Korik hesitated before nodding, clearly relieved that she had made the decision easier for him. "I will relay your message, Your Highness, though I suspect this will not be the last challenge to his position." After he left, Vaithril turned to me, her expression a mixture of frustration and resolve. "I apologize for my court's behavior. They do not understand what I already do. That I'm the reason you're still breathing? That effectiveness matters more than comfort," she said, something my court has forgotten in their years of peace. That evening, while reviewing the embassy's security logs, I noticed something unusual buried within routine maintenance reports: a brief power fluctuation in the lower ventilation systems 3 nights earlier, dismissed at the time as a minor technical glitch. My instincts told me otherwise. I brought it to Vathrill's attention immediately. "Someone accessed the ventilation system the same night as the ambush," I explained, pulling up the logs on a nearby console. It wasn't a coincidence. They were mapping the building. "For a second attempt? For something bigger," I said. "This wasn't just reconnaissance for another ambush. Whoever did this was planning long-term." Her expression darkened. "The Guildmaster." "Probably," I said, "which means the next attack won't come from a handful of assassins testing our defenses. It'll come from someone confident enough to commit fully." We spent the following days reinforcing the embassy's security in ways her original guards had never considered, rerouting power systems, installing hidden sensors along blind corridors, and preparing contingency plans for scenarios her court would have dismissed as excessive. Vathril insisted on being involved in every decision, refusing to be treated as a passive target waiting to be protected. Her willingness to learn, to adapt alongside me, rather than simply trust blindly, only deepened the respect growing between us. "You could simply order me to stay hidden," she said one evening, helping me trace potential entry points on a holographic map of the embassy. "Many in my position would prefer that." "Hiding doesn't stop people who are determined enough," I said. "It just delays the inevitable. Better to prepare than pretend the threat doesn't exist." "You truly believe that?" "I've seen what happens to people who don't." She didn't ask me to elaborate, and I didn't offer more than that. Some things were easier left buried, even from someone I was beginning to trust. The attack came 6 days later, not during the quiet hours of night as I expected, but in the middle of a diplomatic gathering meant to reassure the Dominion Council that Vathril's security was stable. Dozens of dignitaries filled the embassy's main hall, unaware that danger walked among them disguised as invited guests. I noticed it first in the way certain attendees avoided direct eye contact, their movements too deliberate, too controlled for genuine nervousness. Professional killers, blending seamlessly into a crowd that trusted appearances far too easily. "We have a problem," I murmured to Vathril as we moved through the hall together. "How many?" "At least 4, maybe more," I said. "They're using the gathering as cover." Her expression remained calm, despite the tension building beneath the surface. "What do we do?" "You stay close to me," I said, "and trust that I've already planned for this." Before she could respond, the first sign of trouble revealed itself. A server, near the refreshment table, subtly reaching beneath his uniform, fingers curling around something hidden from view. I moved instantly, closing the distance before he could complete the motion, using the crowd itself as cover for my approach. I disarmed him quietly, using controlled pressure to prevent any noise that might alert the others, then guided him toward a service corridor, where embassy security could handle him without drawing attention from the guests. But the moment of quiet didn't last. 3 more attackers revealed themselves near the hall's upper balcony, no longer bothering with subtlety once their first operative failed. Panic spread through the crowd as weapons emerged, dignitaries scattering toward exits while Vathril's guards moved to intercept the threat. "Stay behind me," I told her, positioning myself between her and the chaos unfolding across the hall. The guild's operatives moved with practiced coordination, using the fleeing crowd as cover while attempting to close the distance toward Vathril. I met them head-on, using the hall's layout, tables, decorative pillars, scattered furniture, to control the fight rather than allowing them to dictate its pace. One attacker lunged toward me with a blade, but I redirected the strike, using his own momentum against him before disabling him with a precise counter. Another fired a shot that grazed my side, a burning line of pain I forced myself to ignore as I closed the distance and ended the fight before he could aim again. Vaithrel's guards handled the third attacker together, their earlier skepticism replaced by genuine coordination as they fought alongside my strategy rather than against it. Only one assassin remained, standing near the balcony, weapon aimed directly at Vaithrel through a gap in the fleeing crowd. There wasn't time to reach her. I grabbed a decorative shield from a nearby display and hurled it toward the balcony with every ounce of strength I had left, the impact throwing off the assassin's aim just enough for the shot to miss its mark entirely. Vaithrel dropped to the floor as instructed, and I closed the remaining distance in seconds, disabling the final attacker before he could recover. Silence fell across the hall as embassy security finally arrived, securing the defeated assassins while medical staff moved to assist the injured guests caught in the chaos. Vaithrel rose slowly, her composure returning despite the fear still visible in her eyes. "You planned for this," she said, looking around at the scattered furniture, the disabled attackers, the careful positioning that had turned a public event into a controlled battlefield rather than a massacre. "I planned for something," I said, pressing a hand against the wound along my side. "I just didn't know exactly what form it would take." Her eyes lingered on my injury, concern breaking through the last of her composure. "You are hurt again. Story of my life lately." She helped me toward a nearby seat, ignoring the protests of nearby officials eager to usher her toward safety. "You could have avoided that shot by staying farther back," she said quietly. "Why do you continue placing yourself in danger instead of simply directing others to intervene?" I met her gaze, exhaustion and pain blending into something close to honesty. "Because giving orders from a distance doesn't guarantee the outcome. Being close enough to act does." She studied me for a long moment, understanding settling deeper into her expression than ever before. "You do not fight to survive, do you? You fight to make certain the danger ends completely." "That's the idea," I said, allowing myself a tired smile despite the pain. As embassy security finished clearing the hall, word of the failed attack spread quickly, reaching far beyond the embassy's walls to the one person who had underestimated a human's resolve for the final time. Somewhere within the shadows of a hidden stronghold, the guildmaster of the Valkyrie received the news with quiet, controlled fury. 2 attempts, 2 failures, 7 operatives lost. This was no longer a simple contract to fulfill. This had become personal, and personal meant the guildmaster would no longer send subordinates to handle a problem that clearly required their own direct involvement. The next confrontation would not happen through hidden ambushes or disguised operatives blending into a crowd. The next confrontation would happen face to face, and only one side would walk away from it. I didn't know that yet. Sitting in the embassy's medical wing while staff tended to my wound, Vaithrel close beside me, despite the objections of her advisors. But some part of me, the part shaped by years of conflict long before I ever set foot on Kesh Station, already sensed that the real fight hadn't even started yet. Everything until now had simply been the guild testing the waters. The storm was still coming. News of the failed gala attack spread through the Dominion Council faster than the medical staff could finish treating my wound. By the following morning, Vaithrel was summoned to an emergency session, her advisors demanding answers about how a supposedly controlled event had turned into an open battlefield. I wasn't invited, which told me exactly how her court still viewed my role: useful, perhaps even necessary, but not someone they considered worth including in matters of formal governance. Vaithrel returned hours later, exhaustion evident in the tightness around her eyes. "They want to strip my authority to hire independent security," she said, sitting across from me in the embassy's private study. "They believe your presence is what escalated the guild's response." "They're not entirely wrong," I admitted, "but the alternative was letting the guild succeed without resistance." "I know that," she said. "I told them exactly that. Some listened, Others remained convinced that removing you will somehow convince the guild to abandon the contract. That's not how this works, I said. Their pride is invested now. Even if you fired me tomorrow, they wouldn't stop. They'd just see it as confirmation that pressure works. She nodded slowly, already understanding the logic, even before I finished explaining it. The council has scheduled a formal vote in 3 days to determine my security arrangement. Until then, my authority remains intact, which means you remain by my side. 3 days, I repeated, just enough time for the guildmaster to plan something worse. Her expression darkened, the weight of that possibility settling heavily between us. You believe they will not wait for the council's decision. I believe pride doesn't wait for politics, I said. I spent the following days preparing more intensely than before, aware that whatever came next would likely be the guildmaster's direct response rather than another delegated attempt. I studied every possible entry point into the embassy, coordinated more closely with Vaithril's guards, and pushed myself through exhaustion to ensure nothing was left to chance. Vaithril noticed the toll it was taking, though she said nothing about it directly, choosing instead to bring meals to the security office late at night when I refused to stop working long enough to eat properly. "You should rest," she said one night, setting a tray beside me as I reviewed security footage for the 3rd time. "Rest doesn't stop assassins. Exhaustion gets people killed just as easily as carelessness," she countered. I looked up at her, surprised by the sharpness in her tone. "You've been paying attention." "I have been paying attention to everything since the moment you saved my life," she said, "including the way you push yourself far beyond what any reasonable person would consider necessary." I set down the tablet, finally allowing myself a brief pause. "It's necessary because the alternative is failing to protect you. I've already seen how that ends for people who hesitate." Something in my tone must have revealed more than I intended, because her expression softened into quiet curiosity. "You speak as though you have lost someone this way before." I hesitated, the memory surfacing despite years of trying to keep it buried. "A long time ago," I said. "Different job, different war." I hesitated once, thinking there would be time to react. There wasn't. "Is that why you were blacklisted from mercenary work?" she asked gently. The question caught me off guard, though I shouldn't have been surprised she had looked into my background. "Something like that," I said. "After that mission, I stopped hesitating entirely. Some people considered that more dangerous than useful." "I consider it exactly why I am still alive," she said firmly. We sat in comfortable silence for a while after that, the weight of my past settling quietly between us without judgment. It was the closest I had come to trusting someone with that part of myself in years, and something about the way she accepted it, without fear or pity, made the moment feel less like a burden and more like understanding. The council's vote never had the chance to take place. 2 days later, during a routine perimeter check along the embassy's outer wall, my instincts flared with a warning I couldn't ignore, subtle but undeniable, the sense of movement where none should exist. I signaled Vaithril's guards immediately, pulling them into defensive positions just as the first wave of the Guildmaster's forces breached the embassy's outer security. This wasn't a small team testing our defenses. This was an organized assault, dozens of operatives moving with terrifying precision, cutting through outer security checkpoints with brutal efficiency. Alarms blared throughout the embassy as staff scrambled toward designated safe zones, while Vaithril's guards fought to hold defensive lines against an enemy clearly prepared for exactly this scenario. "They're not holding back this time," I said, pulling Vaithril toward the embassy's inner chambers. "This is the Guildmaster's response," she said, breathless from the sudden chaos. "They intend to end this tonight." "Then we make sure they're the ones who don't survive it," I said. We moved quickly through reinforced corridors I had mapped days earlier, avoiding the main areas where the fighting was heaviest while still positioning ourselves to respond if the enemy broke through. Vaithril's guards fought valiantly, but even skilled Threllian warriors were struggling against the sheer coordination of the guild's forces. I directed our movement toward the embassy's central security hub, a fortified room designed to withstand exactly this kind of assault, but the path there required crossing through one of the most exposed corridors in the entire building. "This is too dangerous," Vaithril said as we approached the corridor's entrance. "There must be another route." "There isn't time," I said. "We move fast. We move now." We sprinted across the exposed corridor together, and for a moment it seemed like we might make it through without incident. Then the far door burst open, revealing a figure unlike any operative I had faced before, tall, composed, moving with a level of confidence that immediately told me exactly who I was looking at. The Guildmaster. "Human," they said, voice calm despite the chaos surrounding us. "You have caused considerable inconvenience." "Guess I'm good at my job," I said, positioning myself between them and Vaithril. The Guildmaster studied me for a long moment, something almost like respect, flickering behind their otherwise composed expression. 2 failed attempts, 7 operatives lost. I admit, I did not expect a single unregistered mercenary to cause this much disruption. "Then you clearly haven't dealt with enough humans," I said. "No," they agreed. "And after tonight, I suspect the rest of the galaxy will understand exactly why that was a mistake." Without warning, they attacked, moving with a speed that immediately told me this fight would be nothing like the ones before it. I barely managed to deflect the first strike, the force behind it rattling through my entire arm despite my best defense. This wasn't a subordinate testing boundaries. This was someone who had spent their entire life becoming exactly what their reputation promised. I fought back with everything I had, drawing on instinct and experience built through years of conflict long before this contract ever began. Vaithril retreated toward the security hub as instructed, though I could hear her calling out warnings whenever the Guildmaster attempted maneuvers I couldn't see coming. The fight stretched across the corridor, each exchange more desperate than the last, until a stray strike finally caught me hard enough to send me stumbling against the wall, pain radiating through my already injured side. The Guildmaster paused, studying me with something between curiosity and calculation. "You continue fighting, despite clear disadvantage," they said. "Most would have surrendered by now." "Guess I'm not most people," I said, forcing myself upright despite the pain. "No," they agreed. "You are something else entirely." Before they could press their advantage further, Vaithril's voice rang out from the security hub entrance, sharp and commanding despite the danger surrounding her. "Guildmaster Draex Vorn, your contract ends tonight, one way or another." The Guildmaster's attention shifted toward her, expression unreadable behind their composed exterior. "Your Highness, I had hoped to resolve this without further complication. There is no version of this where I simply surrender," she said. "You should have understood that before accepting this contract." I used the brief distraction to close the distance, refusing to let the Guildmaster's focus shift entirely away from the real threat standing directly in front of them. The fight resumed with renewed intensity, both of us pushing past exhaustion and pain in pursuit of an outcome that would determine far more than just this single confrontation. Somewhere beyond the corridor, the sounds of battle began to fade as Vaithril's remaining guards finally gained the upper hand against the guild's forces, buying precious time for the confrontation unfolding between myself and their leader. But time alone wouldn't be enough. This fight would only end one way, and both of us knew it. The Guildmaster's confidence, once so composed and controlled, was beginning to show the first cracks of genuine concern, an emotion I suspected they rarely allowed themselves to feel. For the first time since this contract began, they were no longer fighting an inconvenience. They were fighting for their own survival, against an opponent who had already proven, again and again, exactly why humans had earned their fearsome reputation among the stars. And I had no intention of letting this fight end in anything less than their complete defeat. The corridor had become a battlefield built for two, every strike from the guildmaster carrying the weight of years spent perfecting their craft. Every counter from me, drawing on instincts sharpened through conflicts they could never fully understand. Neither of us was willing to yield, and neither of us had the luxury of hesitation. "You fight like someone who has already accepted death," the guildmaster said, deflecting a strike aimed toward their side. "That kind of freedom is rare." "I fight like someone who's decided losing isn't an option," I replied, pressing forward, despite the exhaustion burning through every muscle in my body. They studied me for a brief moment, something almost like curiosity flickering behind their otherwise unreadable expression. "The reports about your kind were not exaggerated after all. You should have listened to your own survivor," I said. The fight resumed without further words, each exchange faster and more desperate than the last. I could feel my body reaching its limits, the accumulated damage from days of relentless preparation and multiple confrontations finally catching up with me, but I refused to let exhaustion dictate the outcome of this fight. Somewhere behind me, I heard Vaithril's voice calling instructions to the remaining embassy security forces, coordinating their efforts against the last of the guild's operatives still fighting throughout the building. Her composure under pressure only strengthened my resolve to make sure this confrontation ended in her favor. The guildmaster shifted their approach, becoming more aggressive, clearly recognizing that prolonging the fight only gave their opponent more opportunities to find an opening. I met their intensity with equal determination, refusing to retreat even as their strikes grew more precise and dangerous. A sudden opening appeared, brief but undeniable, and I seized it without hesitation, driving forward with everything I had left. The guildmaster's confidence faltered for the first time since the fight began, their defense breaking just enough for me to gain the advantage I had been searching for. The confrontation ended not with a dramatic final blow, but with the guildmaster finally recognizing the inevitability of their defeat, their weapon lowering slightly as exhaustion and injury overtook their composure. I held my position, unwilling to relax, until I was certain the threat had truly passed. "You could have ended this sooner," they said, voice strained. "Why continue holding back?" "I wasn't holding back," I said. "I was making sure you couldn't hurt anyone else after this." They studied me for a long moment, something shifting behind their expression, understanding mixed with reluctant respect. "The stories about your species will change after tonight." "They already have," I said. "You just haven't caught up yet." Embassy security arrived moments later, securing the guildmaster along with the remaining operatives who had survived the assault. Vaithril emerged from the security hub, her expression a mixture of relief and disbelief as she took in the aftermath of the confrontation. "You survived," she said, relief evident in her voice as she approached. "Barely," I admitted, finally allowing myself to lower my guard now that the immediate danger had passed. She studied me carefully, taking in the visible exhaustion and accumulated injuries from days of relentless conflict. "You fought their leader alone, without hesitation, despite every disadvantage against you." "Wasn't much of a choice," I said. "They were between me and you." Her expression softened, something deeper than gratitude settling into her golden eyes. "You could have simply retreated, allowed my guards to handle the confrontation while you protected yourself." "That's not how this works," I said. "Not for me." The following hours passed in a blur of medical treatment, security debriefings, and quiet moments where the full weight of what had happened finally settled across the embassy. The guildmaster, along with the surviving operatives, was formally detained under Dominion custody, their once feared reputation now permanently altered by a single confrontation against an unregistered human mercenary. News of the failed assault spread quickly, not just through the Dominion Council, but across the wider Concord networks that connected countless species throughout this region of space. The story of a human bodyguard defeating the Valkyrie Guild's most elite forces, including their own guildmaster, became impossible to ignore. 3 days later, Once the chaos had finally settled and the embassy returned to something resembling normalcy, Vaithrel found me sitting alone in the same private garden where we had walked together just over a week earlier. The quiet space felt different now, calmer, safer, though the memory of everything that had happened still lingered in the air between us. "The council has withdrawn their objection to your position," she said, taking a seat beside me. "Given recent events, they no longer question the value of your protection." "Took them long enough," I said, allowing myself a tired smile. She studied me for a long moment, something thoughtful behind her expression. "May I ask you something honestly?" "Always." "Why did you truly accept this contract?" she asked. "You told me once, it was simply for the credits, that you needed the work. But I have watched you these past days, and I no longer believe that was your true reason." I considered the question carefully, weighing how much of the truth I was ready to share. "The credits were part of it," I admitted. "But the real reason was simpler than that. Nobody else in that room was willing to take the risk of protecting you. Every other guard saw the danger and calculated the odds against getting involved." "And you did not calculate those odds?" "I did," I said. "I just decided the odds didn't matter as much as doing what was right." She was quiet for a long moment, processing my answer with the same careful consideration she applied to every decision I had watched her make throughout this ordeal. "That is a very human answer," she finally said. "Is that a compliment or a warning?" "Perhaps both," she said, a small smile finally breaking through her usual composure. We sat together in comfortable silence, the weight of everything we had survived settling into something calmer, more permanent. The galaxy beyond the embassy's walls had already begun to shift its understanding of what humans were truly capable of, not through conquest or aggression, but through unwavering loyalty and a willingness to sacrifice everything for what mattered. Word spread quickly across the Concord networks, reaching diplomats, nobles, and leaders from species who had once dismissed humanity as unstable and unpredictable. The story of a single human standing against an entire guild of professional assassins, defeating their most feared leader without hesitation, became a turning point in how humanity was perceived among the stars. Within weeks, quiet inquiries began arriving at human settlements scattered across Concord space, requests from wealthy officials and cautious nobles seeking protection they had never before considered necessary. The reputation that once made humans feared and avoided was slowly transforming into something else entirely, a reputation built on trust, earned through action rather than mere assumption. Vaithrel remained under my protection long after the immediate threat had passed, our working relationship evolving into something neither of us had expected when this contract first began. She continued to defy her court's expectations, choosing loyalty and effectiveness over comfortable tradition, while I found purpose in a role I never imagined would matter this much. Late one evening, standing together on the embassy's highest balcony, watching the distant stars stretch endlessly across the horizon, Vaithrel finally voiced the thought that had clearly been building since our confrontation with the guildmaster. "Do you regret accepting this contract?" she asked quietly. I considered the exhaustion, the pain, the weight of everything we had survived together, and found my answer surprisingly easy. "No," I said, "not for a single moment." She turned to face me fully, gratitude and something warmer shining in her golden eyes. "Then I am grateful you chose to stay. Wasn't much of a choice," I said, echoing her earlier words. Not once I understood what was truly at stake. The stars continued their silent journey above us, indifferent to the battles fought, and the lives changed within the embassy below. But something had shifted permanently within the galaxy's understanding of humanity that night, a lesson learned through conflict and sacrifice rather than words alone. Humans were not simply unpredictable variables to be feared and avoided. We were exactly what the galaxy needed when every other option had already failed, willing to stand between danger and those who mattered most, without hesitation, without calculation, and without ever backing down until the threat was completely gone. The Valkyrie Guild had learned that lesson at a devastating cost. And across the wider Concord, countless others were only just beginning to understand why humans had earned their fearsome reputation, not through cruelty or conquest, but through unwavering loyalty that refused to bend, even when every rational choice suggested surrender. Vaithrel reached out, resting her hand gently against mine, a quiet gesture of trust built through fire and sacrifice rather than empty promises. I accepted it without hesitation, understanding fully now that this contract had become something far more meaningful than credits or obligation ever could. It had become a bond neither of us intended to break, and as the stars continued their endless journey above the quiet embassy, the galaxy slowly began to understand exactly what it truly meant to have a human standing guard, loyal, relentless, and utterly unwilling to let those they protected fall, no matter the cost required to keep that promise.